Hello and welcome to History After All's first reading list in English. Reading lists are a format that we are especially proud of. We find them especially enjoyable to prepare and present. Zeynep and I will be presenting a reading list on modern Turkey in English today. Reading lists are geared towards a particular audience. We will be categorizing them based on how specific they are. For example, today this list is on modern Turkey or modern Türkiye, and we are aiming this to be a very introductory, very broad reading list that is particularly geared towards, of course, anybody interested in modern Turkish history, but people from academic circles doing scholarly work on related areas to Turkey and intent on obtaining a particular set of information on modern Turkey. When we say modern Turkey, we are speaking of a time frame between the late 1700s to today, more or less, but this list will be more about the time period between the late 1700s and mid 20th century. So late Ottoman Empire and early Republic will be talking about specifically about these time periods. We will be making other reading lists on other topics, and how specific and particular those lists will be evident in the title that we use. For example, if we are using a broad term like modern Türkiye, it will be a more introductory, more general reading list aimed towards a more general audience. But if you're, for example, talking about Turkish foreign policy, let's say, this will be more specified towards a audience that might be more academically interested in Turkish foreign policy. Thus, we will be using more specific academic sources in order to help them come across maybe sources that they weren't previously aware of. But for now, for today, we will be sticking with the essential modern Turkish histories, particularly written by foreign scholars or written in Turkish and then translated. You will be seeing examples of both in the list. As we made a similar list in Turkish a few months back, there will be some overlap, but this video is inherently different because the sources are, of course, much more varied in Turkish. For example, we could deal with class struggle and economic development more thoroughly. Today, we will be looking through a similar but somewhat different lens to tackle the most essential Turkish histories in English. We will be talking about 10 books. Some of them are more specific than others. We thought it would be necessary to include them. Some of them are more general, some of them are more, again, particular and specific. And it's an important side note, but this is our selection. We do not mean this 10 book list is a complete list on modern Türkiye, and they are not ordered by our perception of their importance. They are ordered in a more generally, there are exceptions, but generally from broader to more specific. Let's begin. So our first book is Bernard Lewis's The Emergence of Modern Turkey. It was initially, yeah, you can see the cover from Zeynep's screen. It's not a very appealing cover. It was initially published by Oxford University Press in 1961. It is one of the essential Turkish histories, not only written by a foreign scholar, it still is very widely used in Turkey today. It is a bit dated, but it is very lively. It tackles modernization from a mostly Western-centric standpoint, but it spans from mid to late 1700s to more or less 1960. The book is mainly divided into two parts. The first part is more narrative. The second part aims to examine societal and cultural and economic changes from the Ottoman period to modern Turkey. I do believe the second part could have been dispersed within the first part. So if the book was a bit more balanced between narrative and analytical, and there was no divide between the first and second halves, it would be maybe a better flowing text. But still, of course, especially the first part of the book is very, very easy to read, and it focuses on the attempts of Ottoman modernization and underlines the radicalism of the Kemalist revolution in a very lively, very colorful language, and it's very easy to follow generally, even for a Turk. The fact that it was written by a American scholar in the 1960s, it doesn't make it any less appealing or any less interesting. It still is one of the most essential books on Ottoman Turkish modernization. The fact that it spans from the late Ottoman Empire to the early Turkish Republic in a very consistent and lively manner makes it indispensable in my eyes, or in many Turkish historians and Turkish readers' eyes. It's very, very important, and I do think it's, along with some of the other books that are included in this list, it's a great starting point if you are interested in Turkish history, but if you don't know where to start. The thickness of the book, it's around 600 pages, I think, might be a bit frightening to you, but believe me, the text flows perfectly and it is generally very, very easy to read. But some books on this list may be more suitable for newcomers if you are a total newcomer.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me well. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, so I'm using a fan in my room to battle with the heat. The second book on our list is Turkey from Empire to Revolutionary Republic: The Emergence of the Turkish Nation from 1789 to present by Sina Akşin. Here you can see the cover, a little bit blurred, but anyway. Sina Akşin is a household member in modern Turkish history, and he was initially a graduate of Istanbul Law School, but he later studied on international relations in the U.S. And his book was first published by Hearst and Company in 2007. It was written in Turkish by Sina Akşin and translated to English by Dexter Mursaloğlu. It was designed actually as a handbook of modern Turkish history that would be of use for non-expert readers. It's an easy to read, comprehensive, concise work of Turkish history. The book includes 5 parts. In the introduction, it gives a little of background, Turks from pre-Ottoman era to the 19th century. In the second part, An Empire in Travail, the second part covers the era of fundamental reforms in modern Turkish history, constitutional movement, the fall of the empire, etc. And the third part, it consists actually 12 chapters ranging from the Turkish War of Independence, the founding of the Republic, Kemalist reforms announced, and it is titled The Era of Atatürk. The fourth part, titled İsmet İnönü and His Multi-Party System. And this part covers the rest of the single-party era upon Atatürk's death. The Second World War, Turkey's successful transition into a multi-party electoral system, democracy, and it ends with the 1960 coup d'etat. And the last part is titled Military Interventions and Their Aftermaths. It covers several military interventions conducted between 1971 to 1980. And it covers also Turkish economy's transition into a liberal economy, neoliberal economy, and also covers the 90s and early 2000s. And actually, the book ends with, it's one of my most favorite parts of the book. It ends with a bibliographical note that actually constitutes a literature review of late Ottoman Republican history of Turkey in English. So it's actually a little bit, fun to end with that. And like I said, it's designed as a handbook of great use for non-expert readers. And it's about, I believe, at around 400 pages, so not that thick. So there is that for now.
Next up is A Brief History of the Late Ottoman Empire by Şükrü Hanioğlu, one one of the best known scholars of late Ottoman to early Turkish Republic periods. A brief history of the late Ottoman Empire was originally written in English, and first of all, it was one of the most impressive books that I read in the past year. Its various chapters and parts may vary between being very broad and very in depth, and I do believe it is also a model for anyone intending to write any scholarly book, such as a brief history of, or a general history of, or a introductory history of. So it's very interesting as a book in its method of having been written as well. It is very academic, first of all, but it also is very interesting to any new coming readers. So if you are completely new to late Ottoman Empire's history, or the history of Ottoman modernization, it can, in some parts, be a very easy introduction to late Ottoman Empire's history. But it can also, depending on its chapters, can be a very in-depth analytical work of scholarly history. So it both caters to newcomers and experts alike. Of course, it wouldn't, as a general history, it wouldn't particularly cater to experts or scholars already very familiar with the area. But if you are working on the history of the late Ottoman Empire and specifically interested in the topic or in the contents of a chapter, it will be very useful to you, even if you are not a complete newcomer to the period and time frame as well. So it's very interesting as a model in itself. It spans from the late 1700s, early 1800s to the end of the First World War, so the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the Committee of Union and Progress, the First World War, the Tanzimat reforms, the Ottoman attempts of modernization are also very thoroughly dealt with in the book. Culture, economy, the military aspects of the late Ottoman Empire are very thoroughly examined as well. And Hanioğlu does something interesting. Many general histories or introductory histories stick to pre-existing scholarly works about the topic, but Hanioğlu at times uses primary sources to bring together a more general narrative that caters more to readers that are not as familiar with the period and with the topic. So it's very interesting as a book, and I wouldn't say it's that easy to read, especially the at times imbalance between being very broad and very in-depth may make it a bit dizzying for some readers. But if you're interested in the period, it is, especially if you're not already an expert, it is a must read for both Turkish readers and foreign readers that are interested in the topic.
The fourth book on our list is titled The Development of Secularism in Turkey. It is by Niyazi Berkes, a Turkish Cypriot sociologist. He studied at the University of Chicago, worked at Ankara and McGill universities. And his work was first published by McGill University Press in 1964. Berkes covers the transformation of Turkish society from early 18th century to the late 20th century in his book. Berkes's work provides insights into the history of the relationship between religion and state in Turkey, and how the secularization of Turkish state apparatus, as well as the people. It explains that basically the development of secularism in Turkey was not a sudden occurrence, and it was not a foreign concept enforced by the elite ruling class in early 20th century. And it is I can say not very much beginner friendly, but it shouldn't scare you, if you're interested in the topic in Turkish society's history. And the book is divided into 5 parts, 17 chapters. The parts are titled as The Glimmerings, 1718, 1726, This part comprises three chapters looking into earliest modernizing efforts in Turkey and how they broke down eventually. The second part, the breakthrough 1826, 1878. This one consists of five chapters and explains how the concept of a secular state was formed in the Ottoman state and the beginning of Tanzimat era and the constitutional movement that led to the opening of the first parliament of the Ottoman state. The third part is titled The Reaction, 1878, 1908. This one consists of two chapters that put the lens on the Hamidian regime, the era of Abdülhamid II, and its absolutist monarchy regime, how the constitutional movement was under oppression while the Turkish national movement was also emerging. The fourth one is titled The Search for a Fulcrum, 1908, 1919. This one encompasses four chapters, covers the second constitutional era, the Turkish public political awakening, the Turkish national movement furthering the Ottoman state's struggle to keep up with the Western world by conducting modernization through social reforms. And the last one is titled The Struggle for Establishment of a Secular Nation State, 1919, 1920, 1939, I'm sorry. This one basically covers the Atatürk era of modern Turkish history, let's say. It comprises three chapters and covers the Turkish War of Independence, the foundation of the republic that is secular, democratic, holding rule of law based on universal human rights above all. So, like I said, it is not as beginner friendly as the previous ones. However, as far as we are concerned, it is a must read if you're looking insight into Turkey's late history. And also, it is one of the books that must be read in order to, gain a further insight into Turkey, especially its Turkish version also, which was published by Yapı Kredi Yayınları, Türkiye'de titled Türkiye'de Çağdaşlaşma. It is an absolute must read to understand Turkey well.
The fifth book on our list is The Making of Modern Turkey by Feroz Ahmad, published originally by Routledge in 1993. You see a blurry version of the cover on Zeynep's screen. The Making of Modern Turkey, among the ones that we already talked about, I do believe if you read one book as an introduction to modern Turkish history, make sure you're reading Feroz Ahmad. I mean no disrespect to Bernard Lewis or Sina Akşin or Şükranioğlu is again limited to the late Ottoman period anyway. It's not one of the more general modern Turkish histories. But Feroz Ahmad, in my opinion, is if you are a complete newcomer, it is the place to start. The Making of Modern Turkey is made up of 10 chapters. It deals less with the Ottoman period. It is a more of an introductory chapter called The Ottoman Legacy. But Feroz Ahmad is one of the most prominent scholars in the Committee of Union and Progress period. And the transition between the CUP era to the Republic is one of the most important areas of study for Feroz Ahmad. So his book is especially important in grasping the essential realities of the transitional period. You can also, although I wouldn't completely recommend it, you can also read it based on specific chapters. So if you are just trying to gain some insight on the Turkish War of Independence or the First World War, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the emergence of the Turkish Republic, the third chapter of his book is called From Empire to Nation, 1908 to 1923. So is a possibility to just read that chapter and gain some important insight into modern Turkish history. But the book also deals with a very consistently economy and the military. The book deals throughout the text the importance of the Turkish army in Turkish modernization. And one of the central questions is whether the Turkish army is the driving force, driving factor behind Turkish modernization. But the text also very consistently interacts with the economy of the period as well. So if you're trying to gain a more technical understanding of Turkish economy, a more societal grasp of Turkish history, this is a good place to start. The book also deals with the military interventions. Modern Turkey had, in the 20th century, four military interventions: the 1960 coup, the 1971 coup, the 1980 coup, and the 1997 coup. The first three are included and more or less form the backbone of the narrative of this book here. So the military aspects of Turkish modernization and modern Turkish history are very essential and important within the narrative. But I would recommend against focusing too much on the last one or two chapters, because the book concludes with 1991. It also focuses thoroughly on the economic revitalization of Turkey in the 1980s. But for a historian, it is a bit too recent to write about the 1980s if you are aiming to be published in 1993. So you may take the last one chapter or two chapters with a grain of salt. But other than that, if you are starting somewhere, I do believe lengthwise as well and accessibility wise, this is, in my eyes, the place to start. But you wouldn't be wrong to start with Bernard Lewis in Action, or depending on your area of interest, any of the books that we include on the list. Next up is the possibly the most commonly used academic work on modern Turkish history, and possibly one of the most controversial books on this list. It's Turkey: A Modern History by Erik Jan Zürcher. Erik Jan Zürcher had this book published initially in 1993. It underwent four different editions, the last of which was published in 2017. And within these editions, the book saw considerable change. So not just the time frame, because the 2017 edition includes up until the 2013 Gezi protests. So it's the time period also extended between the editions, but also the main arguments had to be adapted to the new reality of Turkey, because to be completely honest, Erik Jan Zürcher is very popular in Turkish historiography, especially abroad, but his method in designing the parts and chapters of the book is a bit problematic. And secondly, his main arguments between the third edition in, I think, 2003 or 2004 and the fourth edition in 2017, his main arguments, or some of his main arguments, completely collapsed. Because it's a book on modern Turkish history, it also dealt with the possible trajectory of Turkish development, Turkish modernization after the book concludes. I think the third edition concluded with the 1990s or 1980s, but 2017 edition deals with the 1990s, early 2000s. Zürcher is very controversial in Turkish historiography. There is a essential imbalance between the importance that is put on his work and the reliability of his arguments in essence. I don't want to go too much into detail, but for anybody interested, we have a almost 2 hour long review of Turkey: A Modern History. We also have a book review on The Making of Modern Turkey by Feroz Ahmad, if anybody is interested. But Zürcher's review is particularly in depth, and I would recommend anybody able to watch the video in Turkish to go check that out. There are two main problems with Zürcher's arguments. One is related to the Turkish War of Independence and the Kemalist Revolution. He is a proponent of a argument or thesis that the Turkish War of Independence was designed by the Committee of Union and Progress. It's very highly debated. And secondly, he used to be a big proponent of the moderate Islamist, pro-European Islamist administration in Turkey. But as the Islamist authoritarianism became more and more evident, he had to go back and revise his theses and arguments. But these aren't the only problems. Turkey and modern history is also a bit convoluted in its design, because while the chapters are chronological, the main narrative is chronological. Within the chapters, his narrative is at times not chronological. So this lack of chronology also results in an inability to comprehend the historical reality of the period. But it also makes it easier for him to push his arguments or his thesis or his opinions onto the readers. So it is very essential, especially based on how famous it is and how much everybody relies on it when it comes to modern Turkish history. But it is probably the most controversial book on this list. It is important if you are especially interested in modern Turkish history, if you are going to read about modern Turkey. It is important that you also cover Turkey and modern history by Züher. But if you have any intention to go further than the most introductory facts, some of which are even problematic in Züher's book, then I would strongly advise you to also check some of the other books that we include on this list.
So the next one is The Turkish War of Independence, a military history of 1919 to 1923 by Edward J. Erickson. Erickson is actually a retired US Army officer and also a military historian. And he taught in the Marine Corps University for 6 years. And his book was published by Prager in 2021. And as the name suggests, it is a comprehensive military history of Turkish War of Independence. It is the most comprehensive one and might be the only comprehensive narrative of Turkish War of Independence in English. Erickson covers battles, fronts, comparisons of combatant forces, and more in his book. His point of view as a retired officer actually sets his work apart. And in that sense, he fills a huge gap in the literature. And he consults and compares Turkish, Greek, and Allied sources regarding the invasion of Anatolia. The book consists of 12 chapters, as these are titled as following: The End of World War One, Call to Arms, to the First Inonu Campaign, The Long War Against Insurgents, A Short War on the Eastern Front, The Franco-Turkish War, Second Inonu and Kütahya-Eskişehir Battles, the culminating point at Sakarya, operational and strategic pause, the Great Offensive and the pursuit to Izmir, the advance to the Straits and the armistice, and the last one is titled The Treaty of Lausanne and the Establishment of the Turkish Republic. It is a military history, so the ones looking for a further look into the Turkish War of Independence would be satisfied with this one. And it is not much, complex and tiring narration of the war. It is exciting and an easy read, actually. And also, a few months back, we inspected this one, and we have a video of it titled The Turkish War of Independence by Edward J. Erickson, I believe. And it was not yet translated to Turkish back then. I believe last month its translation into Turkish was published by Alfa Yayınları, so you could further look into it. However, it is in Turkish, so you guys might want to look into that.
Next up is The Ottoman Endgame by Sean McMeekin. The complete title is The Ottoman Endgame: War, Revolution, and the Making of the Modern Middle East 1908-1923. You might remember just a few minutes ago, I focused specifically while talking about Feroz Ahmad's book, the chapter that focuses on the period between 1908, the Young Turk Revolution, or the proclamation of the second constitutional monarchy, and the 1923 declaration of the Turkish Republic. This book, I'm not trying to draw a similarity between that chapter in Ahmad's book and this book in itself, but this book focuses solely on that period between 1908 and 1923, so the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the emergence of the Turkish Republic. It is a very colorful, very interesting book. It also is the closest thing that we currently have to an international history of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and again the emergence, the birth of the Turkish Republic. It is comprised of three parts. The first one is The Sick Man of Europe. It focuses on the period between 1908 and 1914, so the second constitutional period, second constitutional monarchy period. And the second part is the War of 1914. Turkey plays its hand, and it forms the backbone of the book. It's by far the longest part, and the third part is Death and Rebirth, and it covers the Turkish War of Independence, or in other words, the Kemalist Revolution that led to the emergence of the Turkish Republic by the renunciation of the Ottoman Empire and the rebirth of modern Turkey from the empire's ashes. McMeekin is at times a bit controversial in his thesis, not just in this book. I would say this is one of the most interesting books that I read. It has a lot to offer for even people previously having dealt academically with this period, but he can be at times controversial with his thesis. Let's say he is not afraid of starting discussions or arguments. That can be a nice way of putting it. But this is a very, very interesting book that has a lot to offer, both for newcomers and experts. There are other books focusing on this period, but among the ones that I have read, this is, I believe, not to be missed. It also is in Turkish, published by, I believe, Yapı Kredi as Osmanlı'da Son Fasıl. So our Turkish audience might want to check that out as well.
So the next one is an economic one, actually. Uneven Centuries, Economic Development of Turkey Since 1820 by Şevket Pamuk. Pamuk is originally an economist with a focus on economic history. He's a graduate of Robert College, Yale, UFC, Berkeley, top schools all around. And he also taught at institutions such as London School of Economics and Harvard. So he's a star-studded one. The book is a part of Princeton Economic History of the Western World series and published by Princeton University Press in 2018. The book looks into the economic growth and human development in Turkey between 19th and 21st centuries, putting it into a comparative global perspective. Pamuk's paramount work fills a gap in the literature as an economic history of Turkey during that era, and such work was not prepared in English. And as far as I know, it is the most comprehensive study regarding the topic in Turkish as well. It is concise, actually, not that much big a deal when it comes to page count. It consists of 13 chapters, including intro and conclusion. First one is titled Economic Growth and Human Development Since 1820. It is a look into the history of the global economics in general. Second one, Institutions and the Ottoman Past, covers the central government, the notables, i.e. provincial elite of the Ottoman society, its limited private sector, state's land regime, financiers, taxes, and such, and how these factors evolved up until the Industrial Revolution. The next one, Reforms and Deficits, Ottoman Response to European Challenges. It covers the effects of the Industrial Revolution on Ottoman economics and basically consists of reforms the state made, centralization and modernization efforts, and of course the establishment of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, known as Duyun Umumiye in Turkish. Next one covers opening to foreign trade and investment, and afterwards the chapter titled Economic Development and Institutional Change, 1820 to 1914. This covers the first and second constitutional eras of the Ottoman state, and also the Committee of Union and Progress government. It further includes a comparison with Egypt, actually, Egypt's economics. The next one is From Empire to Nation State. It begins with Ottoman economy before, during, and after the Great War, and continues with the War of Independence and founding of the Republic. It reflects changes in the economic system and institutions and the public as well. The next ones are titled as following: Economic Development and Institutional Change between 1914 to 1950, Inward-Oriented Development after World War II, Economic Development and Institutional Change between 1950 to 1980, Neoliberal Policies and Globalization. And the last one is Economic Development and Institutional Change between 1980 to 2015. But I believe it would be wise to approach it with a grain of salt to books of history when they are covering very recent times. I myself would prefer to consult to its previous chapters, and I would resort to its economic history aspect rather than its look on recent developments, as it claims to be a work of history. The last one is titled, it is also a focused one. It is titled Turkish Foreign Policy 1919-2006. Facts and Analysis with Documents. It is edited by Baskın Oran, but it is a collective work of Ankara University's Faculty of Political Sciences. Consists of contributions from known international relations scholars in Turkish political science and international relations academia. The authors are Atay Akdevelioğlu, Gökçen Altkaya, Tuğrul Arat, Mustafa Aydın, Sanem Baykal, Çağrı Erhan, Melek Fırat, Funda Keskin, Ömer Kürkçüoğlu, Kudret Özersay, Erel Teldal, Hikmet Ulubay, and İlhan Uzger. It is published by University of Utah Press in 2010 as a part of Utah series in Turkish and Islamic studies. Let's say it is not a beginner-friendly book, but you can consider it as an encyclopedia. It is almost a 1,000-page book. It's something of a handbook, you can say. One you can refer to when writing and talking about specific topics of Turkish foreign policy. It targets scholars and those interested in the history of Turkish foreign policy. It's basically the great white whale of Turkish foreign policy studies. And it begins, as it is written by international relations scholars, theoretical perspective, and continues with the practice of foreign policy. The book inspects Turkish foreign relations with the Western Europe, the USSR, afterwards Russia, Greece, Middle East, near Africa, the US, and NATO. It covers major issues of Turkish foreign policy, such as repeating patterns, such as the Strait issue and Cyprus issue and such. It consists of 8 sections. Each begins with a general appraisal of the foreign policy conducted during the period. They are titled 1919 to 1923, the time of liberation, covers the War of Independence, 1923 to 1939, relative autonomy. The book purports that during years between 1923 and 1939, Turkish foreign policy was relatively autonomous compared to years after its accession to Turkey's accession to the Atlantic Alliance, And the next chapter is 1939 to 1945, covers the Second World War. Next one is 1945 to 1960, Turkey in the orbit of the Western Bloc. First 15 years of Turkey's official accession to Western Alliance. 1960 to 1980, relative autonomy. 3, 1980 to 1990, Turkey in the orbit of the Western Bloc. 2, 1990 and 2001. Turkey in the orbit of globalization. This one covers globalization efforts, after the fall of the USSR and the expansion of neoliberalism, neoliberal order of the world. And the last one is, like Pamuk's work, covers a very recent time and very specific time periods between 2001 and 2006. Turkey in the chaotic aftermath of 9/11. It covers the domestic and international dynamics that affected Turkish foreign policy during those 5 years after, America's war on terror begins. And like I said, it can be very much considered like a handbook that you refer to when, times you need about specific topics not one you read to cover like previous ones. And like I said, it targets mostly scholars and those interested in Turkey's history of Turkey's foreign policy, right from the beginning of 20th and the end of 20th century.
So these are the 10 books that we picked. There are some differences with the ones that we did in Turkish based on the availability of sources also the fact that our foreign audience might be unfamiliar with a lot of the more in-depth topics or discussions related to Turkish historiography in Turkish. So we covered mostly the general books on modern Turkish history, focusing specifically on modernization, economic development. We also included a book on military affairs and the transition from the empire to the republic. So we believe it is important to have a basic grasp of modern Turkish history in order to understand a lot of different things. Of course, having a at least a basic grasp of Turkish history is essential in understanding the Turkey of today. You will realize a lot of things won't make sense to you when you gain some historical insight, but believe me when I say a lot of things don't make sense to us as Turkish citizens, despite our knowledge of Turkish history either. So, again, it is much better to understand the problems of today related to Turkey based on a grasp of historical reality or historical development. So Turkish modernization is when we say Turkish modernization, a more accurate term would be Ottoman Turkish modernization because the Republic of Turkey was founded upon the collapse of the empire, and it was a revolutionary republic that renounced the imperial vision and legacy to a large part. But Turkish modernization is a history of societal, economic, military, and cultural transformation. Turkey does not look like the Turkey of 100 years ago, and Turkey doesn't really look like the Turkey of 20 years ago. There has been a massive transformation, and there have been massive struggles against a variety of obstacles in each aspect that I mentioned. Turkey is, I do realize, having a basic grasp of Turkish history isn't the easiest thing to do if you're a newcomer because Turkey has a very interesting and complex identity. It is, in some part, a successor to the Ottoman Empire, but in a lot of other senses, it is not. It is a independent country that was founded during a fight against the Ottoman Empire. So there is a very nuanced history there. Some foreigners unfortunately miss out on those nuances. So this list is aimed at providing a groundwork for anyone interested to start out in Turkish history, or even if you're not interested in working on Turkish history within your career, if you just need some pieces of side information, the books that we mentioned today will be very helpful in that regard as well. And having a basic grasp of Turkish history is, I believe, essential in understanding the developments of the 20th and 21st centuries, especially in regard to the Balkans, the Black Sea, and the Middle East, and relations between Turkey and Europe, and cultural relations as well. So we unfortunately see a lot of people making comments and working on Turkey without having said grasp on Turkish history. So these 10 books would be, in our minds, a good place to start out. Of course, there are some introductory books that we did not include. Some of them we chose not to include them very deliberately because we don't agree with their methods or their contents or their main arguments, but some were not included based on our desire to not repeat ourselves. So this is our selection. Another team, another group of people preparing such a list would possibly pick a different list of books, but we hope this will be beneficial to newcomers and some people who are more familiar with Turkish history. So these were the 10 books for delving a bit deeper into modern Turkish history, or having an introduction to modern Turkish history. And thank you for watching, and thank you for the attention. I hope we will be back with more reading lists and more content in English, both on Turkey and a lot of different topics.
Thank you. Goodbye. And don't forget to like, share, and comment on our videos.
Yeah, those are very important. We tend to neglect mentioning those. Thank you so much, and we will see you in the upcoming videos.